People who've seen nice people finally snap. What happened? Story 1. This woman, Mary, I worked with was always pleasant and cheerful, said hello in the lunchroom, and was generally liked. She worked in finance and special projects. She said she wanted to retire in a few years, and she had been working there for 15 years. Her boss started pressuring her to complete our annual budget report faster, but this thing is huge and comprehensive, and a figurative beast. Mary told the boss it would be ready in a couple of weeks, per the usual schedule. The boss said that it needed to be completed within 1 week to give to the higher-ups. Mary said it wasn't possible. Boss emailed Mary and carbon copied a bunch of coworkers and the assistant managers, calling Mary out for a poor work ethic and for making the department look bad. Mary said it wasn't possible and didn't appreciate being bullied. She put in her notice to retire by the end of the week, leaving her boss high and dry. She was the only one who could do the budget report in a timely manner, so the department was double screwed. Good for her. She was an assistant manager and was known for being soft-spoken. At a manager meeting, one of the general managers, who was known for being a total jerk to everyone, was going off on how every store should be run. Well, she snapped. "You have the highest turnover rate out of any store in the district. You can't keep employees for more than 6 months before they just quit, all saying you were the problem. Maybe you should take that advice you're giving us and use it on yourself." Story 2. My best friend had lost his mom to murder a few months prior when we were in the 10th grade. Somehow he had pulled himself together just enough to start going back to school. I don't know how he handled it with being an only child and growing up without a father. His mom was all he had. A kid that thought he was popular, that got on everyone's nerves, cracked wise to my friend's face about his mom's death. What he said isn't exactly sure. My friend threw him on the ground and punched him in the face multiple times. The end result was a broken nose, a broken left orbital, and my friend got kicked out of school. We were very grateful he taught him a lesson, but saddened it had to come at such a high cost. Story 3. As much as it's not uncommon for schools to have a one-strike policy when it comes to fighting, it's also become increasingly common for them to treat bullying the same way, and making fun of a kid for losing his mother seems like a fairly prime example of bullying. Even if they felt like the kids should have handled it another way, it's fairly ridiculous not to give him at least a little bit of leeway given the extreme nature of the circumstances. It's not like he snapped over someone cracking a fat joke or making fun of his clothes. He was reacting to severe trauma, and probably more than a little bit of pent-up stress. But the saddest part is this whole concept of teaching someone a lesson. Maybe he did. He might also have let someone who did something terrible convince themselves that they were the victim. Pain does not always produce empathy. In a case like this, empathy shouldn't need to be taught in the first place. Story 4. A long time ago, I used to do call center tech support for fairly complex issues. A really nice, quiet guy went through the same training class. He talked if you talked to him, but never went out of his way to chat. Right after training, the call center changes a ton of stuff. We start getting squeezed on the amount of time we can do documentation, how much research time we have, just metrics in general. It was utter bullcrap, because the favorites got to go on smoke breaks as often as they wanted with the managers. We'd essentially be punished for that because we had to keep the average numbers in a certain area. He did all the right things. Talked to his manager, talked to their manager, then to HR. It kept getting worse. Plus enforced overtime. Then he got a super long call, he was on it at least 2 hours, about a complex issue, and the customer was just straight up abusing him. But he had to take it because the managers wouldn't give permission to him to hang up. And they were basically screaming at him to resolve this issue and get to his next call. But we couldn't end calls. The customer had to. One day he just stood up, stepped onto his chair, then onto the desk, threw his headset on the desk, and sort of growled something like, "F this," quietly. He looked around, staring people in the face, especially the people who took those long breaks and the managers. Then he walked out, and no one ever saw him again. Everyone was super quiet and afraid to move or say much of anything. Story 5. The tough thing about stories like this is that you can never really be sure what the takeaway should be. Maybe the takeaway is that this seemingly nice and quiet guy was a lot more dastardly than he appeared. Then again, it might just be a cautionary tale that you can never be too sure what sort of mental health issues a person has lurking beneath the surface. It's unfortunately all too possible that this guy was a time bomb just waiting to go off. It's doubly unfortunate that neither his wife nor his kids seemed to know about it. Or maybe they did, and that had something to do with the issues in their marriage. We'll never know, since he didn't really leave anyone alive to tell the tale, besides a confused and frightened child. Story 6. Guy I'd worked with for about 10 years never could get ahead at work. Wasn't bad, but just didn't really excel. He was always kind, always ready to laugh and crack a joke. Never saw or heard him be mean. But apparently him and his wife were having some trouble. though I'd not heard him talk about it much. But one day, while his youngest was out at church with a family member, he flipped out and shot his wife, then himself. Story 7. In middle school, my 6'2" gentle giant friend, who was literally the nicest guy you'd ever meet, got teased about his mom by some short popular kid. My friend, no hesitation, picked him up by his shirt and slammed him against the locker at eye level and said, "Never talk about my mom like that." One of my favorite memories of him. Story 8. I'm not usually the first to use terms like first world problems because things like that are all relative. Your experiences are your experiences, and people shouldn't be villainized for not always appreciating things they're accustomed to just because someone halfway across the world might not have them. But it really sticks out that only in a first world country is food taken for granted to that point that people would waste it on bullying. And I don't know why people think it's okay to mess with something like another person's hair. Making fun of people is bad enough, but actively trying to ruin their hair and clothes is on an entirely different level. As much as I try to understand all people equally and sympathize when possible with people that don't initially seem sympathetic, it's hard to feel too bad for this girl. That egg patty was meant to be eaten. Kay was just helping to make sure it didn't go to waste. That's a very pragmatic girl if you ask me. Story 9. An acquaintance of mine, Daryl, was always a quiet kid that bothered nobody. Given that he was 6'5" and 250 pounds, he played football and was generally respected and liked. One day in Spanish class, the class clown was making his usual rounds, talking crap, until he got to this one girl, Nellie. He never really made fun of people of the other gender, so everyone around him was telling him to step off. But he kept going and finally got to the birthmark on her neck that was very large and dark red. He told her that it dropped her a few numbers down. At this point, just about everyone and their grandma in the class was standing up about to rush him, save for Daryl and a few others. Until Daryl got up, waltzed over to the class clown, picked him up by his hair, and said, and I quote, "If you don't shut up right now, I'm going to put you through that wall," points to the nearest wall. He dropped the clown and walked away. A few seconds later, with his band of merry men behind him, the clown tries to jump Daryl in the middle of the class. Daryl then proceeds to elbow him across the room, run over, pick him up by the shoulder, and put his hands through the drywall right next to the clown's head. Security by this point was called, and both Daryl and the clown were arrested, with both only getting off with fines for damages. Every day, the spackle patch where the hole used to be humbles me. Story 10. This company doesn't really seem to care about protecting anyone in general. On one hand, you have a woman being harassed to the most insane degree. However, what kind of guy buys a house just for the sake of continuously making a woman uncomfortable? As creepy as it is, you almost have to admire his dedication in a weird way. Since no one will charge him and put him on some kind of list, he goes ahead and does the hard work himself to let everyone who comes into contact with him know just how creepy he is. But then you have this woman who threatened his life and destroyed his office. Even if the company was taking his side, why would they think it's a good idea to put him on the same project as this woman? Neither of them is safe from the other at this point. Even having them work in the same company is a recipe for disaster. Putting them on the same project is either the most foolish thing a business has ever done, or this company was secretly running some kind of social experiment. It's probably the former, but you have to admit that the latter is about the only way this story makes any kind of sense. Story 11. When I was a kid in high school, my group of 6 friends were sitting at a round table in the cafeteria for breakfast. A table over, some girls had been tossing small chunks of their food in our direction. My one friend, named M, wore her hair in an unusual spiked-up style, and I guess the girls at the table were trying to land food in her hair while cackling to themselves. Cue my quiet, sweet, introverted friend, named Kay, getting so angry I swear steam was coming out of her ears. One of the girls had thrown a decent-sized piece of her egg patty at us, and it landed on the floor near Kay's foot. Kay proceeded to step on the egg patty, pick it up off the ground, walk over to the table of bullies, and shove the egg directly into the mouth of the one who had thrown it. This was such an amazing moment in my high school memory. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, as Kay was the last person I would have expected to do that. Of course, she did get in trouble, but she didn't regret it one bit. Story 12. Back in 5th grade, I was super lucky to have the elementary school's favorite teacher. Every single student loved her. My class was always super loud and annoying. We were working on some assignment before gym class, and everyone was passing her off. She was only allowing students to go out if they finished the assignment. My slow butt was unfortunately one of the last kids in the room. This one student, who was a god-awful and annoying poop bag, was being way over the top. My teacher got up, put her hands over her ears, and just started screaming, "Shut the F up. Just shut up. Shut up, shut up." And she just stomped out of the room, still screaming with her hands covering her ears. All of us just sat there in horror. A couple of kids just left to go to gym class, and I sat there just trying to finish the assignment. Our principal came into the room a few minutes later, just telling the rest of us to go out for gym class. But she made the poop bag kid stay in the room with her. He was moved into the other 5th grade teacher's room after this. She was completely normal and fine after coming back. And there was nothing else that went wrong for the rest of the year. Just worked her butt off and made all of us love her by her caring soul and all of that fun stuff. But that moment completely traumatized me. Story 13. It really shouldn't have taken that long for the teacher to get fired in the first place. I have no idea what kind of things this teacher normally said to his students, but if he wasn't above making fun of a mother's medical conditions directly to her son, then it seems unlikely he had never said anything equally terrible in the past. Or possibly even worse. This guy should have been reported 100 times over, and maybe he was. It's quite possible that firing him after Bob blew up was just the school trying to cover their bases and make it seem like they'd been doing their jobs. This may not be quite as bad as the kid who got made fun of after his mother's life was taken, but it's not much better. Expelling him seems extreme, especially considering the one provoking him is a teacher. Kids aren't prepared to handle these sorts of high-stress emotional situations. They learn through having decent role models. If only there were some sort of institution, maybe of an educational nature, that exposed kids to adults who could fill that role. If such a place exists, it's safe to say Bob wasn't going there. Story 14. A lady where I used to work was subjected to constant harassment by a much older coworker, and the company failed to do anything about it. He was showing up at her house, eventually forcing her to move house. After she moved into the new house, he bought the house next door. She arrived to work with a baseball bat and stopped at reception to ask if Tom was in. When they asked why, she calmly told them she was there to kill him. She walked upstairs to his office. Reception called ahead and had him take the fire escape, and she instead demolished his office until the police arrived. She was not charged. The company and police knew she had announced her intentions to reception as a cry for help, so she didn't actually find him, because it was clear that if she had found him, she would have killed him. She took some sick leave and eventually returned to work. And the company put her on a project with this guy as her manager, because screw protecting victimized women, right? Story 15. Older brother's wedding. He's a very nice guy. Almost too nice. He had a horrible girlfriend. He adored her, though. She told him that he wasn't good enough and that she would break up with him unless he bought her this super fancy ring and married her. He did. The wedding was very stressful, and she was extra nasty. After they cut the cake, she got herself a huge slice and left him with none, telling him he should go on a diet. For context, he was underweight. He was working his way up to average. He snapped, threw a handful of cake at her pretty dress and hair, then told her to expect divorce papers to sign. He proceeded to scream, cry, and rant about how horrible she was and how she made him depressed. He's better now. They split up and live in different continents. Story 16. Based on the bit about everyone else being normal-sized, it sounds like this Samoan guy wasn't really the type of person that anyone with half a brain should be provoking. What's most baffling is that there have been 2 or 3 other stories where that was the case as well. Who are these remedial clowns who see a big, hulking giant and think that making them mad by insulting them or the woman they care about will somehow work out in their favor? In each case, the big guy has been described as being one of the nicest guys you'd ever meet. So shouldn't you take advantage of the fact that it's easy to keep on the Hulk's good sides? Why go out of your way to draw negative attention from him? If you told me all of these bullies were secretly S&M, I'd be inclined to believe you. That, or they're the very definition of too dumb to live. That almost turned out to be literal in this case. Story 17. The incels were the popular kids at this school? That's crazy enough that I honestly have no idea how to process it. But on a serious note, the sort of toxicity described in this story is one that doesn't get enough attention. It's hard to walk the line between showing empathy for another person's unfortunate circumstances and learning to set boundaries when that person is clearly wallowing in those circumstances while allowing them to get worse for the sake of attention. It can be hard to tell the difference between an honest struggle and what really just amounts to self-indulgence. But when a person makes selfish decisions like turning their back on your friendship and then wants sympathy when they didn't work out the way they'd hoped, it can really help open your eyes. It's unfortunate when it has to happen that way, but sometimes that's just what it takes. Hopefully this girl learns something about choosing healthier relationships in the future. Story 18. I had just started high school and there was a new kid. I was from a one primary/one high school town, so all the kids already knew each other. He was a giant Aboriginal kid who was quiet with no friends, so my friend and I befriended him. We always chatted to him and he was so lovely, always softly spoken and generally just so nice, like holding doors open for us and bashfully smiling when we would go out of our way to be friendly to him. Anyway, he started getting picked on by the bad boy of our grade relentlessly. One day he snapped and beat him up with a garbage can and was expelled, and I never saw him again. Story 19. One of my middle school friends, whom we'll call Bob, was about a half-foot shorter than everyone else. Everyone was around 5 feet. He was an interesting, in a good way, dude. Interested in learning, played video games, was great to hang out with, but he looked scrawny. Didn't look like he could hurt anything, if I'm being honest. For some context to the story, our gym teacher was a jerk. Gave nicknames, some good, some bad, to everyone. He was always sarcastic, always berating everyone, speaking down to us instead of encouraging them. One day, the gym teacher says something about Bob's mom, which Bob's mom had fibromyalgia and some other conditions, making her weak and unhealthy, not by choice. And something in Bob snapped. Bob completely took down this 6'5" monster gym teacher. Gym teacher looked like he stood no chance at that time. They were quickly pulled apart, and Bob got expelled and had to move school, while the gym teacher was fired for fighting a student and being an overall jerk. Story 20. There was a kid at my school in about 7th grade. His name was Frederick. He was loved by everyone, was so nice, and donated to charity regularly. Everyone knew him and respected him. One day, a new kid came to our school. We'll name him Josh. Josh was a big jerk. He hit people, pushed them around, threw food at people during lunch, just honestly a big butt. Well, one day he decided to pick on Fred by doing his normal crap, and Frederick just went ballistic. Punching, screaming, kicking. They were both suspended for 2 or 3 days. After their suspension, they both came back, and Josh had a black eye, bruises on his arms and left leg, and he looked awful. Josh thought everyone would start to hate Fred after what he did to him. But nope, everyone was tired of his crap and picked on him for how bad he looked. Fred was just loved more for this incident, though he told me he got grounded for a week. Story 21. Freshman and sophomore year, the same kid gave me crap at the bus stop and the whole walk home. Every single day, non-stop harassment, just kept needling me constantly. So many people asked me why I took it, but I was just really shy and passive at that age. I stayed quiet and didn't react. One day, the kid tried to push me into some bushes, thinking it'd be funny. He'd never gotten physical before. I grabbed his wrist and put him on his butt. He went down on his back, and when he tried to get up, I put the past 2 years into a single punch that put him right back down. Next day in school, kid had the darkest black eye I'd ever seen. He wasn't at the stop for the next few days, and when he started taking it again, he never said another word. I shocked a bunch of people, but turns out lots of other kids hated this guy and were jealous I gave him what he had coming. It did a lot of good for me, and the positive reaction kind of helped me come out of my shell. 10 out of 10 would punch again. I mentioned this in another thread. Samoan friend, happiest, most friendly guy you ever want to meet. Some guy said something about his sister, and of course it made him mad. My friend went after him and caught him, punched him about 3 times, and we realized he was going to kill him. It took 3 of us normal-sized guys to hold his arm back from hitting the guy one more time. We told the other to run, like, run right now. He did. Our friend was mad at us for a while for stopping him, then he went home. The next day, it was as if nothing happened. He just went back to being a super nice guy. My friend did everything for what had been her childhood best friend, dedicated her entire future to being with her and helping her stay on track. But that friend was incredibly toxic, constantly complaining about what were indeed crappy circumstances, but to a point of excess and exaggeration that she became self-consumed. Constantly complained about how unfair everyone was and how insecure she was. One day, that toxic friend decided to cut everyone off to hang out with more popular kids who were in reality just the weird incel type of gamer boys. But since she was one of those not like other girls, she didn't see this. My friend, as gentle and quiet and wonderful as she is, finally snapped. When my friend inevitably came crawling back, she didn't respond, and instead joked and poop-talked her to me. It was the first time I had seen her genuinely upset and display anything besides a calm humor. Click on one of the videos you see on the screen now, or a Karen will sue you.